You're in a casino. It's late. Too late for any sane person to be awake at all, much less nursing Jack and Coke number 3 and engaging in what appears to be an Old West showdown with a one-armed bandit. You stand there nervously, a strange dread ringing your head like a smoky halo. Then you tentatively raise your last silver dollar, slick from the few minutes it's just spent in your sweaty grip. It feels like the whole world is watching with bated breath as you feed the coin into the machine. You take a deep breath and then you pull the lever. The 3 reels lurch to life and spin wildly, a shining blur dancing before your weary eyes, impossibly fast, like 3 planets rendered in miniature, orbiting furiously in accelerated time. And then, gradually, they start to slow until finally, one after the other, they click into place. There's an image of a bright sun on the left, a dark shadow on the right, and in the middle you see, inexplicably, a mirror, throwing a distorted version of your own face back at you. The ambient sound drops away, and the murmurs of the onlookers fade into silence, and then it occurs to you that you don't even remember walking into this place. You can't remember anything that came before these hours you spent at the machine, and then you know. This isn't just a casino. And this innocent, plaintive-looking mechanical slot machine, which you just now realized is completely anachronistic in this day and age, is much more than a glorified pickpocket. It's a portal to another place, an alternate version of reality. You close your eyes, resigned, as you slip, finally, into a place
between light and shadow.
Hey baby, it's Craig, and you've just been sucked, possibly against your will, into Between Light and Shadow, a Twilight Zone podcast. So, this thing we do here, pairing a first season episode with a later episode, well, sometimes it's a bit tricky trying to come up with a suitable bookend episode for said pairing. It was a cinch last time. 2 episodes about planes flying through time warps, bada bing! And this week, we've got another super easy, even obvious twosome. These are 2 black and white classic television peas in a pod, baby. So much so that when the Twilight Zone was being released on VHS at 2 episodes a pop back in the early 90s, these 2 came out together on the same tape, baby. Bada boom! It's volume 12, in case you want to track it down, baby.
They're gonna give Daddy the Rain Man suite. Do you dig that? We're going to Vegas, Mike.
Vegas! You think we get there by midnight?
Honey, we're gonna be up 500 by midnight.
Vegas!
Vegas, baby! Vegas!
First up is Rod Serling's The Fever, which premiered January 29th, 1960. It was the 23rd episode produced and the 21st to air. We open on a shot of Las Vegas at night, and... Okay, what is this opening music? Is it Hooray for Hollywood? Why the hell are they playing Hooray for Hollywood when this takes place in Las Vegas? Well, it turns out they're not. As Dan Hollis posted on the TZ Cafe forum way back on December 5th, 2005, the library cue is actually, quote, Hollywood Hustle by Lynn Murray, who also composed the score for A Passage for Trumpet. It's very reminiscent of the song Hooray for Hollywood by Johnny Mercer and Richard Whiting. I suspect that Murray had this in mind and was possibly asked at one point to compose a tune that would make people think of Hooray for Hollywood while being just different enough to avoid royalties and charges of plagiarism. End quote. Dan Hollis is the resident TZ music expert over on the TZ Cafe, just as Dr. Reba Wisner is our resident TZ music guru. Now, Obviously, he's using a pseudonym, since we all know that Dan Hollis is a character from the episode It's a Good Life.
Nuts! I can't even play my own record. I can't even play Perry Como!
Yeah, that guy. Now, I have a pretty good idea who he really is, but I ain't saying a word. Dan, I don't know if you're hearing this, but if you are, thanks for the info. Now, the thing that really bugs me about this is there were other tracks in the CBS Music Library that would have worked just as well, better even, for this intro shot. Like, say this. That's called Hustle Bustle Parts 1 and 2, composed in either 1957 or 1958 by William Schaefer. If it sounds vaguely familiar, it's because the Twilight Zone did end up using it. It's the opening shopping mall cue for The After Hours, which was shot just 6 months after The Fever, and later for The Mind and the Matter in Season 2. I edited it down just a bit to match the timing for the episode, and I dare say it works better than the Lynn Murray cue. But that's just one example of what they could have used. The CBS Music Library was a vast collection of music clips, and they had an entire category called City Backgrounds. There's lots of stuff that would have worked. I typically praise the selection of library cues in these stock-scored episodes, but this is a rare misfire. Look, bottom line, you can't show Vegas and play music that evokes Hollywood. You can't. It's just misleading. Dishonest, even. So, under this Hollywood hustle nonsense, we get a pretty extensive montage of Vegas imagery. Neon casino signs, rolling dice, a spinning roulette wheel, and then we land on a middle-aged couple. I don't know, maybe they're a bit past middle-aged. They're Franklin and Flora Gibbs. Yeah, that's some alliteration. Franklin and Flora. Now they're just kind of standing there in the casino, taking it all in. A couple of men approach them. One of them is carrying a camera.
Is your room comfortable? Is there anything I can do?
Oh, it's lovely. It's just lovely. You know, you make us feel important.
You are important, Mrs. Gibbs. After all, it isn't every day that we entertain celebrated contest winners.
No, not every day. Maybe every other day.
They snap a picture of the couple for their hometown newspaper. Remember when newspapers were a thing? You know, my wife Teresa and I got a free trip to Vegas several years ago. In 2005, maybe. Just for sitting through some kind of timeshare presentation or some damn thing. And you know what? Nobody took our picture, and nobody tried to make us feel important. And I don't know, maybe if they had, we'd own a timeshare right now. We learn that the Gibbs' hometown paper is the Elgin Bugle. Which Elgin is never specified. There are Elgins in Illinois, Texas, Minnesota, Nebraska, North Dakota, and hey, there's one right here in Oregon. There's also an Elgin in Nevada, and it's only about a 3-hour drive from there to Vegas. But it probably wouldn't be their hometown. It's really tiny. The population in 2000 was 14 people. It's actually classified as a ghost town now, but in 1959, who knows? In the short story version, which Serling wrote after he wrote the teleplay, he clears up the mystery and reveals that they live in Elgin, Kansas, and that their flight took 6.5 hours. Now, unless planes flew a lot slower back then, they must have had a layover someplace. Nowadays, it takes less than 3 hours nonstop. I guess all of this Elgin business has zero actual bearing on the story, so I'll just move on.
Mr. and Mrs. Franklin Gibbs. 3 days and 2 nights, all expenses paid, at a Las Vegas hotel. One by virtue of Mrs. Gibbs's knack with a phrase. But unbeknownst to either Mr. or Mrs. Gibbs is the fact that there's a prize in their package neither expected nor bargained for. In just a moment, one of them will succumb to an illness worse than any virus can produce. A most inoperative, deadly, life-shattering affliction known as the fever.
So all through the prologue, Franklin didn't say a word, but he was scowling something fierce. When we come back from commercial, we get the full Franklin Gibbs experience.
You know perfectly well how I feel about gambling.
Oh, this is different, though.
It is neither different nor moral. Gambling is gambling. However, this is your vacation, Flora. You won it. But in all good conscience, I must repeat to you what I've been saying all along. It's a miserable, terrible waste of time. But, of course, it's what you wanted. We go to Las Vegas. We waste 3 days and 2 nights. We do it because that is your silly idea of enjoying yourself and because it's not costing us anything.
You dick!
So, honey, you want to do this thing, and it's important to you, and I get that, and I'm here to support you, but let me just remind you that it's a complete and utter waste of time, and it's stupid, and you're stupid for wanting to do it, but hey, go out there and knock yourself out, but just remember that I hate it, and I'm going to be miserable the whole time I'm here, and I'm going to make you miserable too. If we're supposed to hate this guy right off the bat, well, mission accomplished, Rod. Serling is a bit notorious for lambasting his protagonists, but oddly enough, he didn't say anything negative about Franklin in his intro. It's like he wanted us to find out for ourselves.
I won the jackpot! I won!
Some lady hits the jackpot, and we're treated, or subjected, to an unreasonably close shot of her face. Why are we so tight on her? I don't get it. It's disquieting. We're going to get some dramatic close shots of Franklin later, but those will make sense within the context of the story. This doesn't. Something catches Flora's eye and she wanders over for a closer look. It's a nickel slot machine, and she does what any normal person would do and drops a nickel into it. And of course, Franklin, who's something other than normal, throws a fit.
Just what do you think you're doing?
Well, it's only a nickel machine.
Only a nickel machine. Why don't you just take handfuls of nickels and throw them out into the street?
Dick!
I can just imagine these two at the grocery store back home, and he's like, all right, Flora, you can buy that can of beans and spend the 9 cents, but you're stupid, and those beans are stupid, and you're stupid for even wanting to buy them, and I hate them, and I hate you, and I'm not going to eat them, and if you make them for dinner, I'm going to throw them on the floor just so you'll have to clean it up. God damn, this guy is a tool. So your wife wins a trip to Vegas, and you come with her, and she wants to drop a nickel in the slot machine, and you freak out about it? What did you think was going to happen when you went to Vegas? Like, what was your plan for entertainment? What were you going to do? You clearly weren't going to gamble, so what are you doing there? I don't see any indication that you're planning to take in a Rat Pack show at the Sands or check out the buffet at Caesar's Palace. Dude, what are you doing there at all? And the look on Flora's face is just heartbreaking because you know that this is important to her, that this is something that she's looked forward to, and she's proud of herself for winning it. And this ass clown is just wrecking it for her. You just know that he pulls this kind of shit all the time, and that her life is little more than a series of heartbreaks with this guy stepping on her dreams and pissing on anything that might bring her joy. We're only a few minutes in, and I already hope, strongly hope, that this guy dies horribly. Is Franklin Gibbs the biggest a-hole in the entire series? He just might be. We now advance to one of the clumsiest Deus Ex Machina stunts I've ever seen anywhere.
Hey, old boy. Here, wait a minute.
Please.
Wait, you try it, huh? 1 hour and 30 minutes on this miserable, crummy, marmy grab it. Here, you play it. It's yours. Go ahead, play it. Put it in there. See? That's right. And pull the thing. Well, lots of luck, and I'll see you later, huh? Bye now.
This drunk guy accosts Franklin, shoves a silver dollar into his hand, and forces him to drop it into a slot machine. Uh-huh. There's a neon sign behind them that says cocktails, but for a few moments, only the first 4 letters are visible in the frame right over Franklin's head. This is probably unintentional, but there is a sick part of me that hopes that it was on purpose because he is, in fact, a total cock. And it's here that we get our first good look at the third main character of tonight's drama, the slot machine. In Serling's short story version, which again he wrote after he wrote the teleplay, he described it as follows, quote, big, gaudily lit, with a glass-covered compartment in the center, showing an incredible number of silver dollars inside its big metal gut. Two lights over this compartment had an odd similarity to eyes, and the slot at the bottom filled out the picture of a monstrous neon face. It did resemble a face. The two lights were eyes. The glass-covered square in the center with the silver dollars inside, that was the nose. An opening at the bottom where the money came down, that was the odd little mouth with the protuberant lower lip. End quote. What Serling doesn't say, but we can plainly see, is that face appears to be smiling. There's a logo on the machine that says Roll-A-Top. Roll-A-Tops were made by the Watling Manufacturing Company. If this was an episode of the new Jordan Peele series, this would totally be a Whipple Industries slot machine. Don Creekmore is the owner of Nation's Attic, a company dedicated to finding and restoring vintage slot machines, among other cool items like antique diving helmets, swords, and, Enigma machines. He also maintains a blog, and back in July of 2010, he posted a write-up about the Roll-A-Tops on display in the Fever. Quote, "While I'm not old enough to have visited Vegas in the early 1960s, my research and period photos have given me a darn good idea of what kind of machines were operating in the casinos at that time. Suffice to say, the star machine in the show, the Watling Roll-A-Top, was not at all a standard machine used back then, especially by casinos. After stopping and starting the Twilight Zone DVD a few times, I was able to identify all of the machines in the casino set. There is quite an eclectic collection of machines dating from the early 1930s to the late 1940s. The first machine that got my attention other than the Roll-A-Top was a really rare AC multi-bell. These rarely come up for sale today and are very unique. A mix of Mills Black Cherry and Golden Falls machines can be seen lined up a few times. A Mills Extraordinary and Mills High Top machines are also in the room. Another interesting machine is a Mills Jackpot Revamp sitting off to the side in a number of scenes. Watling Roll-A-Tops in various forms are sprinkled in the background as well. The primary Roll-A-Top is actually quite rare. It appears to be a $1 vendor front. I've had a number of rare Roll-A-Top machines, but I'm actually not aware of any real $1 Roll-A-Top machines. By accepting dollars, I'm sure the escalator was modified or even removed, which is probably why the white lens was placed over the top as well. The machine could be a $50 model, and the show simply implied that it was $1. Silver halves and dollars do look similar from a distance. Regardless if it's a 50-cent or a $1 machine, it is quite odd that a large denomination machine has the mint vending columns on it. It's possible that this machine was modified somehow for the show, or the mechanism was switched out. I'm sure the show's director or prop department did not even know that the machine originally vended mints." End quote. I dare say the Fever would have been a very different episode if the machine was dispensing mints the whole time.
Mentos, the fresh maker.
And I should note that Nation's Attic's base of operations is in Wichita, Kansas, which is only a 2-hour drive from Elgin. So where were we? Okay, so this random guy manhandled Franklin and forced him to shove a silver dollar into the slot machine, then wandered drunkenly back to the bar. Franklin's got that deer in the headlights look. Flora smiles and nods at him, encouraging him to go ahead and live a little and pull that lever.
Look out! The lever! Get away from that lever! You'll blow us all to atoms!
So Franklin pulls the lever and boom! He wins! The machine barfs up 10 silver dollars. He eagerly snatches them up, and for a minute, he's like a kid on Christmas.
Oh, Franklin, you are lucky.
It wasn't even my dollar. That man gave it to me. He made me put it in the machine.
And then he immediately returns/regresses to the Franklin we've come to know and loathe.
Now you'll see the difference between a normal, mature, thoughtful man and these wild idiots around here. We'll put this in our room and we'll take it home with us.
Of course, dear.
Yes, but not these baboons around here. They'd throw it away. They'd compulsively put it back in the machine. But not the Gibbs. The Gibbs know the value of money. Well, come, my dear, I want to shave before dinner.
Thanks to the glorious magic of high definition, we can see that he's completely clean-shaven already. So what exactly is he planning to shave? maybe some questions are best left unanswered. Franklin and Flora go to leave, and the drunk guy comes back and sticks another silver dollar in the machine, and it pays off. What are the odds that a slot machine would pay off twice in a row? Now, just as the machine spits out the coins, we hear... It's as if the machine called out to Franklin as he was walking away. The sound of coins dropping into the tray somehow formed words. It's a really cool effect. In the Twilight Zone Companion, Mark Scott Zachary describes how this unique sound was created. Quote, "The first step in the process was to tape the sound of metal coins. Next, a human subject was chosen. 2 small speakers were strapped to either side of his esophagus. The sound of tinkling coins was played out through the speakers to the effect that when the man opened his mouth, the sound came from his throat. This sound could then be shaped into words by using the tongue and lips, just as with sounds from the larynx. But he himself made no use of his own voice whatsoever. The tape provided all the sound, and voila, one talking slot machine." End quote. I actually attempted to replicate this effect digitally to, really put this episode of the podcast over the top, but everything I tried just made me sound like a robot. Damn it. So Franklin and Flora are back in their room in their separate twin beds because it's 1960 TV, and Franklin can't sleep. We get a nice, semi-dream sequence here in which Franklin keeps hearing that slot machine voice calling to him. He's lying awake in the dark, staring at those silver dollars he won, which are now stacked up in a single column on the dresser across the room. And each time he hears that infernal machine taunting him, the stack somehow grows bigger, as if promising him greater wealth if he'll only acquiesce and play some more.
Franklin, is something the matter?
Cue the lamest excuse ever to go back to the casino and be a total hypocrite.
Nothing except that this is not the kind of money I like to keep, Flora. No good can come from money won like this. I'm going back in there and feed it back into the machine, Flora, and get rid of it. If there's one thing I know, Flora, it's morality. And I will not have this tainted money smelling up our pockets. So you go back to sleep, Flora.
Not to beat a dead horse here, but if he's a man of such high moral fiber, why would he ever agree to bring his sanctimonious, angelic white ass to Vegas to begin with? It's Sin City. Isn't he tainted just by being within the city limits? Shouldn't Flora be turning into a pillar of salt just by looking at it? Oh, wait. He's totally full of shit. That's what he's doing there. It's one of those thou doth protest too much sort of deals. Of course, he's going to complain the loudest about the sinfulness of it all. And of course, he's going to be the first to completely cave the first chance he gets. 3 hours later, Flora finds Franklin deep in the throes of a wrestling match with that wicked one-armed bandit, disheveled and sweaty, and still plugging silver dollars into it as fast as it'll eat him. Keep in mind that in 1960, a silver dollar was more than $8 is today, and Franklin's historically been a total tightwad. He's likely pissing their life savings away. Continuity error alert! Franklin goes up to the cage to write a check to get some more silver dollars. As he's walking back to the slot machine, he passes a guy who is playing at a different machine, and he looks a lot like Rod Serling, by the way. In the very next shot, we see the exact same guy walk behind Franklin and Flora, coming from the opposite direction, crop dusting the joint with a thick trail of cigarette smoke. It's right around the 13-minute mark if you're watching the episode on Netflix.
Franklin, dear, you know how awful you feel in the morning after you've been up too late at night.
Flora, will you kindly shut your mouth? I hate a shrew, Flora. I hate a woman who stands in back of you and sees to it that you have miserable luck. And that's what you're doing to me now, Flora. You're giving me miserable luck. Now, please, go away and leave me alone.
Please, people are listening.
The devil with people. I'm not concerned with people.
Might as well face it, you're a dick.
As if we didn't already have enough reasons to despise Franklin, Serling adds some additional grist for the old hatred mill in the short story version. Quote, "She drew back, white-faced, feeling the shriveling shame that was always caused by Franklin's temper. He noticed it, and it egged him on. It always gave him a kind of perverse satisfaction to yell at Flora. She was so plain and so weak. She was such a piece of dough to be pulled and kneaded and pounded, and she was worth screaming at because she would not react. Not like the machine that had been his enemy for so many hours, his tormentor. He wanted to kick the machine, to scratch it, gouge it, make it feel pain. But the machine was impassive and invulnerable. Flora wasn't. Flora with her mousy little face. For a passing, exploding moment, he wanted to hit her, to smash his fist into her face. But it was almost as good to scream at her and get a reaction." End quote.
You dick, 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 dick. You dick, 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 dick. You dick, 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 dick. You're a dick.
So this goes on for several more hours. Franklin wins a little, loses a little, but never makes any real headway, never wins enough to justify calling it quits. He's in full-on agitated flop sweat mode. It's now the next morning. Flora is still there, watching as her rock-solid husband gradually falls completely apart. Going back to Serling's short story, he gives a nice description of Franklin's state at this point. Quote, "He was a sour-faced little man in an old-fashioned suit, and he stood at the machine gorging it with silver dollars, trying to make it vomit back at him. He was a dope addict now, in the middle of a long and protracted needle, and he never really knew, even at 5 in the morning when the room was empty, except for one blackjack game, one dice table still operating, and himself, that in every clinical sense, he lost his mind." End quote.
I swear to you, Flora, this machine mocks me. It teases, beckons, mocks me. Put in 5, get back 4. Put in 6, get back 5. But it's got to pay off. Sooner or later, it's just got to, I tell you.
And then he's down to his last silver dollar. He's either out of checks to cash or their bank account is completely drained. He hesitates a bit, then drops it into the machine. He pulls the lever and it sticks. The mechanism is jammed. Or maybe the slot machine is a sentient being who's sticking it to its latest victim one final time. In his frenzied state, Franklin clearly believes the latter and starts pounding on it.
Give me back my dollar. That's my last dollar. You miserable, dirty. Give me back my dollar!
I want my $2!
Oh my God.
He takes a few steps back. For a brief moment, it seems that maybe he's regaining his senses. But no, he only moved back to
Give me back my dollar!
get enough of a running start to knock the slot machine over flat on its money-grubbing back. He then pounces on it to continue beating on it. It's here that security finally grabs him and hauls him out of there. It's apparently fine to scream your head off in the casino and beat on a slot machine, but knocking it over crosses a line. So that night, he's back in the hotel room in bed and wait, he just attempted to destroy hotel property and they didn't kick him out? I mean, okay, Flora's prize was 3 days and 2 nights, all expenses paid, but they'd probably be well within their legal rights to cut it short given the circumstances. But on top of that, wouldn't he have been hauled off by the cops? Okay, for whatever reason, he's still in the hotel, still being comped the room, and nobody's even keeping an eye on him. Well, except for Flora, who remains loyal and concerned.
Darling, can't you sleep?
That machine, Flora. It was ready to pay off, and it deliberately broke down so it wouldn't have to. It's not even a machine, Flora. It's an entity. It's a thing. with a mind and a will of its own.
And it's apparently not done with him. He jumps out of bed, looking wildly around the room. There's nothing there. He then opens the door. The machine is there, blinking incessantly at him. He slams the door. The door then swings open, and the machine floats into the room.
It's chasing me. It's following me. It's trying to get me, Flora.
We then see Flora's perspective. The door is closed, and they're alone in the room.
There's nothing there!
But from Franklin's perspective, the machine is coming toward him, closing in on him. So the fact that Flora can't see or hear the machine strongly suggests that this is all in Franklin's fevered little mind. Ha! See what I did there? Fevered, because it's called the You get it.
Franklin!
Franklin backs away, right into the window, which shatters behind him. He falls to the pavement below. Flora races to the window and looks down at her husband's broken body. Of course, it's a bit ludicrous that a window several stories up would be so brittle, but this is otherwise a pretty visceral scene. It's a bit surprising that they actually show Franklin's corpse lying there, covered in glass. We've seen other Twilight Zone characters take similar plunges. Edward Hall in Perchance to Dream, Ethel Bedecker in Escape Clause, Phyllis Britt in What's in the Box, two different characters in A Most Unusual Camera. I'm sure there are others, but we never see them afterwards. Serling's description of the events is even more graphic in the short story version. Quote, "The last moment of Franklin Gibbs's life was spent in a mad dash across the hotel room toward the window. He went through it, taking most of the glass with him, to land 2 stories below in the concrete walk that surrounded the big swimming pool. He hit it, forehead first, and the loud snap that separated his vertebrae at the back of his neck bore no relationship to any sound that Flora had ever heard before. But she heard this over the sound of her own screaming as she stood at the broken window and looked down at the crumpled figure of Franklin Gibbs in his pajamas, his head tilted at an odd angle to his body. He was quite dead." End quote. Okay, so the scene as presented in the episode suddenly doesn't seem so visceral after all. But interestingly, Serling has Franklin running through the window versus being backed slowly through it, which certainly feels more plausible. But the episode is canon, so we have to accept that the window was just that delicate. Franklin may have just gambled away their life savings, but Flora should be able to get a nice settlement for her trouble.
There's a stretcher coming. Be here in a couple of minutes. All right, everybody, let's get back to bed. Show's over. Let's go. Let's get out of here.
The hotel guests return to their rooms, and the first responders step away. We hear the sound of a single coin being dispensed, and a silver dollar rolls across the pavement right next to Franklin's dead hand. And then we see the slot machine, its lights still blinking, right there in the parking lot.
Mr. Franklin Gibbs, visitor to Las Vegas, who lost his money, his reason, and finally his life to an inanimate metal machine variously described as a one-armed bandit, a slot machine, or in Mr. Franklin Gibbs's words, a monster with a will all its own. For our purposes, we'll stick with the latter definition because we're in the Twilight Zone.
Weird. So Flora couldn't see or hear the slot machine, so we naturally assumed that it was all in Franklin's head. The first responders have stepped away, but they'd still be on the scene. I mean, they're not just going to leave a corpse unattended while they're waiting for the coroner to show up, and there's no indication that they can see or hear the machine. But now Franklin's dead, so he wouldn't be still hallucinating, would he? So is the slot machine really there or not? Serling clarifies things again in the short story. Quote, No one in the hotel could explain what the one-armed bandit was doing near the pool where they found it the following morning. It was in pretty bad shape, dented, scratched, with the lever stuck tight and most of its glass broken. But they sent it to the factory for a repair job, and it was due back on the line within a week or two. End quote. Okay, so the slot machine is actually there. So it is an actual entity, or maybe an inanimate object possessed by an entity. That doesn't explain why Flora couldn't see or hear it, however, unless it has the power to cloud minds. Not sure why it would have needed to do that, though, if it was just going to stick around near the body until it was found. Did I say Serling clarified things here? Now I'm not so sure. Not that everything needs clarifying. Now, aside from the promotional benefit Serling was aiming for when adapting select teleplays into short stories for tie-in paperbacks, he was also afforded the opportunity to flesh them out, but he usually stayed within the confines of the story itself. But he did add a kind of coda at the end for The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street, which we covered back in August 2017. Wow, has it really been that long? And he did the same for The Fever. Quote, "The pool boy found the silver dollar the next morning and put it in his pocket, and Flora Gibbs flew back to Elgin, Kansas to pick up the broken crockery of her life. She lived a silent, patient life from then on and gave no one any trouble. Only once did anything unusual happen, and that was a year later. The church had a bazaar, and someone brought in an old used one-armed bandit. It had taken 3 of her friends from the Women's Alliance to stop her screaming and get her back home to bed. It had cast rather a pall over the evening." End quote. Makes the whole thing even more tragic, doesn't it? We kind of think that maybe Flora will actually be better off without Franklin constantly stepping all over her, but instead she's permanently traumatized. But you know, if Serling really wanted to illustrate the danger of gambling and its pervasive, addictive nature, he should have added something like this at the end instead. Flora is leaving, being escorted out by the same guy who welcomed them at the beginning, and she has to walk through the casino on her way out of the hotel because, you know, that's how they'd have it set up so you can lose a bit more money as you're leaving. She hears a metallic voice call her name, and she slowly turns and walks toward a slot machine, blinking at her from across the room. Like many writers, Rod Serling was often inspired by elements from his own life and experiences and wove them into his Twilight Zone teleplays. As Martin Grams Jr. reports in The Twilight Zone, Unlocking the Door to a Television Classic, Serling recalled that, quote, "I got this idea about 3 o'clock in the morning in a Las Vegas gambling casino. I'd been about 60 minutes battling a one-armed bandit, and I got a feeling of what an extension of this kind of weakness might be to somebody a little different than I am, making an assumption, of course, that there is someone weaker than I in this nefarious area." End quote. In the very recent graphic novel The Twilight Man, Rod Serling and the Birth of Television, Corinne Shadme depicts this very event, in which Serling states, quote, "I swear that machine was demonic. I almost lost my pants that night, but at least it gave me a good idea for a story." End quote. He even has Serling playing a roll-a-top slot machine, and we see a sign that reads, "Special Jackpot, $10,000, just like the one we see in The Fever. The Fever was directed by Robert Florey, the second of his 3 Twilight Zone assignments. He also directed Perchance to Dream and The Long Morrow. He got his start in the silent era, directing experimental short films heavily inspired by German expressionist cinema. One in particular is amazing, 1927's The Life and Death of 9413, a Hollywood Extra. I'll put a link in the show notes, you've got to see it. Florey was assigned to direct 1931's Frankenstein, which was supposed to star Bela Lugosi as the titular scientist's monstrous creation. But disastrous early screen tests got both Florey and Lugosi booted off the project and assigned instead to an adaptation of Murders in the Rue Morgue, which, by the way, is finally coming out on Blu-ray in December from Shout Factory. After a prolific film career, Flory transitioned into live television in the early 50s, where he was equally prolific. Remember last time when I mentioned that Justice Addis directed 38 episodes of Schlitz Playhouse? Well, Flory directed 38 episodes of Four Star Playhouse, plus 32 episodes of Schlitz Playhouse. When live anthologies gave way to filmed anthologies, he put in time on The Barbara Stanwyck Show, Thriller, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, plus, of course, his trio of Twilight Zones. The last thing he directed was an episode of The Outer Limits called Moonstone in 1964.
Who are we?
The cast of characters.
Acting!
Flavor. This is the kind of flavor I can do without, Flora. You know perfectly well how I feel about gambling.
Everett Sloane was a member of Orson Welles' legendary Mercury Theater Company and, as such, appeared in several early Welles films, including Citizen Kane, Journey into Fear, and The Lady from Shanghai. His work as the thoroughly detestable Franklin Gibbs constitutes his sole Twilight Zone appearance. He played the similarly detestable Walter Ramsey in Rod Serling's Patterns, a live drama presented by Kraft Theater in January 1955. This, incidentally, was the teleplay that made Serling a household name. Sloane reprised the role in 1956 for the big screen version. We'll actually be discussing Patterns, both versions, when we cover A Stop at Willoughby in the semi-near future. Around April, I think it'll be. Don't quote me on that. History suggests that it'll actually be something more like spring 2022.
Oh, Franklin, you are lucky.
Flora Gibbs is played by Vivi Janis, who got her start doing bit parts in film noirs like Kansas City Confidential in 1952 and 99 River Street in 1953. Soon she was appearing regularly on a wide variety of TV shows in one-off roles: I Love Lucy, Dragnet, Alfred Hitchcock Presents, Perry Mason, and The Twilight Zone. Twice, in fact. She also plays a long-suffering wife in the season 2 episode The Man in the Bottle, but happily, her husband there isn't nearly the abrasive ass that she's got here. Fun trivia fact, she had 2 husbands in real life, too, and both of them were Twilight Zone veterans. Her first husband was Robert Cummings, who was amazing in King 9 Will Not Return. They were divorced in 1943 after 8 years. In 1955, she married John Larch, a 3-time TZ veteran. He was the psychiatrist in Perchance to Dream, the sheriff in Dust, and, most memorably, little Anthony Fremont's father in It's a Good Life. They were married until her death in 1988. Larch, incidentally, lived until 2005, but he never remarried.
Enjoy yourselves, folks. And remember, you have unlimited credit.
Mr. Hanson is played by William Kendis. He's only in the episode for probably a minute, maybe less, but I'm mentioning him because he appears in another Twilight Zone episode. He played Olmsted, the bus driver in Will the Real Martian Please Stand Up? The majority of the music in The Fever is derived from 2 different CBS Music Library pieces, one by Jerry Goldsmith and another by Renee Garagwank. Both suites were first released in 1984 by Varese Saraband on their 4th Twilight Zone soundtrack album, and both were titled simply Jazz Theme. The Goldsmith track came first and the Garagwank track followed it. When the 5 LPs were released on CD in Japan in the early 90s, the cues were retitled. Goldsmith's track became Jazz Theme 2, and Garagwank's became Jazz Theme 3. This was done to accommodate an additional library suite by Goldsmith that they dubbed Jazz Theme 1. Those 5 LPs, incidentally, never got a proper CD release in the States. Instead, we got 2 best-of compilations.
Hey! Greatest hits albums are for housewives and little girls.
Which I totally bought because that was the only option at the time. I collected the Japanese CDs later. In 1999, Silva Screen released the collective contents of the 5 Varese Saraband soundtracks as the Twilight Zone 40th Anniversary Collection, which retained the 1, 2, 3 jazz theme titles. For the record, the Garagwank piece is actually called Street Moods in Jazz, and would be used in later TZ episodes such as The Chaser, which we're going to cover probably February, and The Prime Mover, which we're going to cover real soon. like in just a few minutes soon. And speaking of the CBS Music Library, when I was scanning through the Playhouse 90 episode The Velvet Alley for a clip of actor Alexander Scorby for our coverage of the episode The Last Flight recently, I made what amounts to a startling discovery in the realm of OCD Twilight Zone music research. Listen to this.
Her hair, her eyes, her nose. What's the matter? This girl ain't got no mouth?
That's part of Goldsmith's jazz theme too, which is also heard in The Fever. So that's 2 Rod Serling written teleplays from 2 different TV series using the same cue. Okay, most of you probably couldn't care less, but I was mega excited about it. But it makes total sense. Jazz Theme 2 is comprised of cues from an original Goldsmith score for an episode of Studio One in Hollywood called The Fair-Haired Boy, which aired on CBS on March 3rd, 1958, almost a year before The Velvet Alley aired. So the tracks were already in the CBS Music Library at that point. I also made another startling discovery while watching The Velvet Alley. Completely unrelated to the episodes we're covering tonight, but very much related to a different Twilight Zone episode, The Bard. I thought about skipping this, but realistically, we may never cover The Bard on this podcast, and if we do, it'll be years from now, so yeah, I'll just hit it right now. In The Bard, there's a passage of dialogue in which a writer is pitching ideas for potential TV shows.
So now he's champion of the world, but he's made a promise to his girl never to fight again. Now, he's got to fight, but he promised his girl. And when he tells her he's got to fight, she's aghast. I mean, this broad is palpitating. She calls a champion a filthy, rotten, dirty...
She's adamant.
Oh, is this girl adamant? She's adamant like nobody ever was adamant. See, the beauty of the story is you can couch it in so many terms. So maybe he ain't a prize fighter. Maybe he's a cowboy, a Top Gun, and maybe he promises girl never to carry a gun again. And maybe it's the girl's kid brother who has this incurable disease. Say, how about if it was a science fiction piece? This rocket man makes a promise to his girl never to go up in a spaceship again. The zombie story. Oh, it's a fantastic yarn, honey. It's about this dame who marries a guy who walks around on his heels all the time. She thinks he's punchy, but it turns out he's dead. All the time they're married, she don't know he's dead.
Now, a lot of people hate The Bard, which I've never quite understood. I find it a fairly humorous skewering of the inner workings of television and television sponsorship. I mean, yeah, it's got its problems, but I don't hate it. Anyway, so The Bard was broadcast in 1964, and Serling presumably wrote it in either 1963 or earlier in 64. The Velvet Alley aired in January 1959 and featured some dialogue that is very similar to the dialogue I just played from The Bard.
Champion of the world. This girl ain't gonna fight anymore. So now everybody's against this guy. They got the needle out for him. They call him a cheese champion. Max, I got it. Now this time I really got it. You know the fighter? Mm-hmm. The fighter's got a kid brother. And the kid brother's got an incurable disease. I mean, it can't be cured. He needs an operation desperately, right? Okay. So the doctor comes to the fighter. He says, look, man, your brother's a pretty sick cat, Daddy. And I'm telling you, he needs an operation like crazy. Wait, let's say, I got a change. He's a cowboy. He's a fast gun. And he promises his girl that he won't use the gun again,
How about
you see?
a science fiction piece? There's this rocket man who promised his girl never to go up in a spaceship.
The zombie story? Oh, it's a fantastic yarn. It's about this girl who marries a guy who's walking around on his heels all the time, see? Everybody thinks he's punchy, but he isn't. He's dead. See, all the times they're married, she don't know he's dead, you dig?
Did I say very similar? I meant identical. Serling copied those TV show ideas word for word. Now, both The Velvet Alley and The Bard concern television writers, so, I mean... shit. I can't decide if it was a clever reuse or just laziness on Serling's part. I'm sure this will give the Bard haters another reason to hate it. Now, we've talked lots of times here on the show about how the Twilight Zone is perpetually parodied in pop culture. The Simpsons and Futurama have gone back to this particular well many times. But lots of TV series and movies have made winking references as well. In 2005, the Nickelodeon series SpongeBob SquarePants riffed on The Fever by having the character Squidward being tempted by a claw vending machine which calls out to him.
Squidward!
We then get a frenetic montage of Squidward playing the machine, trying desperately to win a stuffed animal, complete with a frenetic jazz underscore.
Oh, what the... Oh, right, let's get this over with.
I'm sure not a single child who's ever seen that episode picked up on the TZ reference, but I'm sure at least a few parents did. I would have. Definitely. Let us now spin the roulette wheel of time in the forward direction and see where we end up. Not terribly far at all. A year plus a couple of months. The Twilight Zone is now in its second season when, on March 24th, 1961, it presents The Prime Mover. We open with some very familiar music, the aforementioned Jazz Theme 3, aka Street Moods and Jazz, by Rene Garriguenc. We're going to hear it a few more times throughout the episode. We're in the Happy Days Cafe, that's D-A-Z-E, and this is the owner, Ace Larson.
Are you listening to me, baby? This is Ace talking to you, your old lover boy, Ace. We've been together a long time, you and me, and I've been real good to you, haven't I? I fed you, I took care of you, gave you everything you wanted, right? Okay. Well, I think it's about time you started paying off.
The camera has been on Ace's face the whole time, so we haven't seen who or what he's been addressing, but a familiar sound brings everything into focus. It's our old friend, the roll-a-top one-armed bandit from The Fever. Apparently, the old girl's casino days are over, and she's found a second life in a sleepy diner away from the glitz and glamour of Vegas. She's also been downgraded to a quarter machine, but she's nonetheless still up to her old tricks. Ace drops 2 quarters in, but gets nothing in return.
Oh, I'm warning you, you pay off or you get out!
A diner patron gently ribs him.
You ought to take it easy, Ace. You're gonna blow a gasket one of these days.
Oh, it's very funny, very funny.
Seriously, man, I heard about this one guy in Vegas about a year or so ago, completely lost his mind on a machine just like that one, and he ended up doing the stockbroker swan dive out a 3rd-story window. Buddy, you need to check yourself before you wreck yourself.
Now, wait a second. I'll flip you double or nothing for the meal. What do you say?
You sure like to get kicked around, don't you?
Never mind what I like. Double or nothing. Is it a deal?
Okay.
Predictably, Ace loses the coin toss.
Thanks, that's a lucky quarter. Mind if I borrow?
He goes to the machine and you can see where this is going. It pays off.
Hey!
The guy collects his winnings and, as he leaves, Ace delivers a sullen kick to the machine.
Yep.
And now we meet the rest of our main cast. Jimbo Cobb, Ace's best friend and co-owner of the diner, and Kitty Kavanaugh, Ace's on-again, off-again girlfriend. Kitty's a bit pissed at Ace for losing the money, and we get the strong impression that this is a regular occurrence. She goes home for the night, leaving Ace and Jimbo to close up.
Maybe your luck will change, Ace. Yeah, maybe next time I'll get electrocuted.
They hear the screeching of tires outside, and here we're treated to a pretty impressive car accident. A 1957 Ford Fairlane.
Come on, Jazz, I got my bulls in a bunch.
Not that Ford Fairlane. Come on, guys. So the Fairlane takes a corner too fast, skids out of control, flips over, and crashes into a power transformer. And just to show you that I don't know everything about the Twilight Zone, I had no idea until recently that this spectacular crash sequence wasn't shot for this episode. It's a clip from the 1958 film Thunder Road, which starred Robert Mitchum. Spoiler alert, it's Mitchum's death scene. But this wasn't the first time this footage was repurposed. You can also find it in 1959's The Invisible Invaders, and later, They Saved Hitler's Brain in 1963. Hey, when it's this well done, it merits multiple appearances.
Jimbo, there's people in there! Come on, Jimbo, lend a hand, will you?
But they can't touch anything. Everything is electrified. Jimbo concentrates hard, so hard that it almost appears painful. The car shudders, then flips back over and rolls away from the live wires, seemingly of its own accord. Ace stares incredulously at Jimbo, who is suddenly exhausted. So, like the Fever, the prime mover contains something of a continuity error, and this one's much more obvious than two mismatched shots of a Serling lookalike. So, we have the power station transformer, which the car has flipped into. Then we have Ace and Jimbo on the other side of the car. So, reading left to right, power station transformer, upside down car smashed up against said transformer, Ace and Jimbo. When Jimbo telekinetically rolls the car out of harm's way, it's rolling away from them. Wouldn't the car be rolling toward them? Now, obviously they had to work around the Thunder Road footage, and they do a really good job integrating the new footage. It's pretty seamless, except for that one unfortunate detail.
Portrait of a man who thinks and thereby gets things done. Mr. Jimbo Cobb might be called a prime mover, a talent which has to be seen to be believed. In just a moment, he'll show his friends and you how he keeps both feet on the ground and his head in the Twilight Zone.
Merriam-Webster defines a prime mover as follows. 1A, an initial source of motive power, such as a windmill, water wheel, turbine, or internal combustion engine, designed to receive and modify force and motion as supplied by some natural source and apply them to drive machinery. 1B, a powerful tractor or truck, usually with all-wheel drive. 2, the self-moved being that is the source of all motion. 3, the original or most effective force in an undertaking or work. I guess it's that third definition that best applies here. Jimbo Cobb possesses a pretty extraordinary talent, the ability to move objects with his mind, which we can certainly call an effective force.
I can't exactly explain it, Ace, but I guess you might say it's a power I got. I can move things around just by thinking. Oh, I know it sounds stupid, but I can. I don't know how come or why or anything, but I can.
Even though Ace has just witnessed Jimbo's incredible power, he evidently needs to see it again in order to believe it. Jimbo, despite being exhausted and possessing a killer headache, an apparent side effect of his telekinesis, he complies. In the modest bachelor pad that the two share behind the diner, Jimbo makes his bed float up into the air, then gently back down again. The music you heard here is a familiar one, Brouillards by Marius Constant. We last heard it playing under Roddy McDowell's discovery that he's in a Martian zoo in People Are Alike All Over. Ace gets an idea. He flips a coin onto the bed and it lands tails up. He asks for heads, and Jimbo nods his head and the coin flips over. Ace then rolls a pair of dice and gets an 8, a 5, and a 3. He asks for a 7. Jimbo nods his head, and the 3 rolls over and becomes a 2.
Oh, you big stupid jerk! We've been beating our brains out for 4 years working that crummy joint. We could have been living like kings!
We've already seen that Ace is a bit of a reckless gambler, so it really comes as no surprise that his first thought is to exploit Jimbo's ability to make some quick cash.
Vegas, baby, Vegas!
We get a montage of Vegas imagery, kind of like the one we saw open the Fever, neon hotel and casino signs mostly, but thankfully they don't trot out Hollywood hustle again. This time we get something a bit more appropriate. That's a Jerry Goldsmith cue called The Girl, originally from the score to a failed television pilot called Man on the Beach. It was one of a veritable melange of cues that made up the aforementioned Jazz Theme 1. So our trio is now in a casino. Jimbo is using his telekinetic influence on the roulette wheel, and the team rakes in a lot of chips in a short period of time. Before I ever discovered the Twilight Zone, I was a big fan of the greatest American hero. When I saw The Prime Mover for the first time, probably, I don't know, in the mid to late 80s, this particular scene seemed really familiar to me because I had already seen Bill Maxwell pressure Ralph to use the supersuit's telekinetic power to do the very same thing.
Let's see, everything on 00.
The all bets are down.
All right, now, don't think about the glitter. Don't think about the dames. Make your mind a complete blank. Forget everything.
00. Another winner, 00.
All right!
Ace trades in the chips for 2 big cardboard boxes full of cash, but he's not done. Kitty bristles at his avarice and storms out. Ace starts to go after her, but is distracted by an impressively endowed cigarette girl.
Cigars? Cigarettes?
No, I don't.
Anything wrong, sir?
No. Nothing at all.
Her name is Sheila, and Ace seems all too happy to forget all about Kitty and buy himself a side piece. Sounds distasteful, but there it is.
Are you the manager?
That's right.
Well, I'd like to hire your cigarette girl for the evening. Would it be all right?
Why, yes. Yes, I believe it'll be all right.
I thought it would.
Now, he claims he's quote-unquote hiring her to help him spend his money, but, I mean, come on. You can't say it on 1961 television, but he just handed a wad of cash to her boss, who agreed to let him have her for the night. I think we all know what's really going on here. And it doesn't help when this happens.
Great, but will you wait till I get dressed?
All right. But not too much.
Ace, you cad, you. The next morning, the phone rings up in Ace and Jimbo's penthouse suite. The phone is across the room. Ace is dead asleep from a night of whatever he and Sheila were doing, and Jimbo doesn't really feel like getting up, so he does what any telekinetic person would do.
Use the Force, Jimbo.
He does his head nod flinching motion and the phone floats over to him. It's a nice effect. I mean, you can totally see the wire, but it was probably relatively invisible until high def came along. It's notorious gambler/gangster Big Phil Nolan on the phone.
Hi, Phil. Good to hear from you, baby. This is Ace Larson. From where? From here, from Nevada. All right, so you never heard of me. You will. Now, you listen to me, Buster. I got $200,000 in this room. I'm hot for a game. I'm ready to bet any part of it. Room 208, right away. And, Phil, bring your friends.
Phil and 3 of his goons arrive, and a high-stakes dice game commences. With Jimbo's subtle ministrations, Ace wins every roll. And then Sheila walks in.
Now, look, this is getting to be a drag. What do you say we separate the men from the boys, huh? So what do you say we shoot the works?
Big Phil looks a bit worried and sweaty.
What's the matter, Nolan? You're supposed to be a big operator, you chicken?
Nobody calls me chicken.
All right, Larson. Go ahead, shoot the works. You're covered.
Meanwhile, Jimbo is clearly concerned about the whole out with Kitty, in with Sheila situation.
Ace is something I...
Okay, 11 is the number.
Ace.
You got it? 11. And this is it.
Ace.
Now, don't bother me.
Ace, listen,
All right, 11.
Ace throws the dice, and they come up 3. Not 11, 3.
You got nerve, pal. I like that.
Big Phil and his goon trio gather up Ace's money, and it's Splitsville, baby.
Look, I'm sorry, but I was trying to tell you, something happened. I lost the power. I guess a fuse blew out. You're not mad at me, are you, Ace? I couldn't help it.
Since the money train has ground to an abrupt halt and has apparently died on the tracks, Sheila storms out. After a moment of stunned silence, Ace does the only thing he can do.
You blew a fuse.
I mean, it's that or break down crying or jump out a window. Me, I probably would have done the latter. Back home at the diner, Ace has the one-armed bandit hauled away, having sworn off gambling in a bid to win Kitty back.
Will you marry me?
Jimbo, do you have a quarter? Call it.
Heads?
All right, Mr. Larson, I will marry you.
As they kiss, perpetual third-wheel Jimbo reaches for his broom, which he dropped in surprise at Ace's proposal. Making sure nobody's watching, he does his patented head nod move, and the broom rises gently into his hand.
Some people possess talent, others are possessed by it. When that happens, the talent becomes a curse. Jimbo Cobb knew, right from the beginning. But before Ace Larson learned that simple truth, he had to take a short trip through the Twilight Zone.
The Prime Mover is an original teleplay written by frequent TZ scribe Charles Beaumont, based on an unpublished story by George Clayton Johnson. Now, we've talked before about how Beaumont farmed out many of his assignments, essentially employing ghostwriters and paying them a portion of the proceeds. But that was during the 4th and 5th seasons of The Twilight Zone, when his health was rapidly declining. In the case of the Prime Mover, it seems Johnson had, well, I'll let him tell it.
I wanted to break into the Twilight Zone, and I had a file of stories, and Charles Beaumont was very good at selling his material. They wanted one new thing after another, and he was looking through his files and couldn't find anything for this upcoming episode, and asked me, did I have anything? And I showed him this short story called The Trouble with Teleportation, and he offered to pay me $600 for the use of the short story, and that I would be credited with writing the story. So I said, fine. Later on, I found out, of all places, at a Writers Guild award ceremony, Chuck broke away from the table for a few minutes because he had to be near a TV set, and I followed him and watched the opening of this program with Charles at the bar, where I saw my name was not on it. And Charles said, oh my God, I told Buck. And then later I got a note from Buck saying, hey, it was my screw-up. Charles told me it was supposed to be your credit, but somehow in the flux of things. So, but I'll see that it is corrected. And I think he had more prints struck off with my name on it as a contributor of the short story on which the material is based.
Now, I've never seen a version of the Prime Mover that credits Johnson, but I don't know, maybe there are some prints floating around out there. 2 first-season episodes were based on Johnson's stories, The Four of Us Are Dying and Execution, and he did get screen credit for those. If you look at the totality of Beaumont's and Johnson's Twilight Zone contributions, the Prime Mover definitely feels more like a Johnson story. It's just a bit too, sunny for a Beaumont, if that makes sense. This is actually very similar in tone to Johnson's A Penny for Your Thoughts, which was actually the first episode fully written by Johnson. And hey, both feature coins being flipped in some manner. Maybe it was Big Jimbo Cobb who made Dick York's quarter land standing up on his edge. Presiding over the Prime Moving proceedings is Richard L. Baer, who directed a total of 7 Twilight Zones throughout its 5-year run. In order of broadcast, he helmed Third from the Sun, The Purple Testament, Nick of Time, The Prime Mover, To Serve Man, The Fugitive, and What's in the Box.
Yonkers, yonkers, yonkers!
He got his start writing and directing a series of live-action comedy shorts in the early 1940s, which were basically instructional films with a comedic tone. So you want to give up smoking, so you want to build a house, so you want to be a salesman, so you want to host a podcast, etc. Okay, not that last one. The series ended in 1955, long before there was an internet and RSS feeds. I think my favorite is probably So You Want to Be a Bachelor.
Hey!
Richard L. Baer retired in 1973, and he passed away in 2015 at the age of 101 years old. Color me impressed.
The cast of characters
A lot of fun, huh, honey? Right? Win a million, lose a million, just like that, right?
Ace Larson is played by Dane Clark, veteran of 40s film noirs like The Glass Key, Whiplash, Backfire, and Moonrise, a personal favorite of mine. He became a very prolific character actor on TV with a heavy leaning toward cop and detective shows. This is his only Twilight Zone, but he worked for Rod Serling again on Night Gallery in 1972. Not much other genre work to speak of, except for 2 appearances on science fiction theater in 1955.
Oh, I know it sounds stupid.
Big Jimbo Cobb is played by Barnaby Jones himself, or if you prefer, Jed Clampett himself, Buddy Ebsen, in his only Twilight Zone appearance. He's got 2 additional Serling connections. He appeared in an episode of Night Gallery in 1972, and he co-starred in the 1973 television adaptation of the novel The President's Plane is Missing, which was written by Robert J. Serling, Rod's brother. He also co-starred in another made-for-TV movie in 1973 called The Horror at 37,000 Feet, which, despite how it sounds, is not a remake of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet.
You've been very lucky. Think of all the money you've won, enough to last you for the rest of your life.
Speaking of Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, Christine White played William Shatner's wife in that one, but before that, she got her Twilight Zone toes wet playing Kitty Kavanaugh here. Kitty Kavanaugh, that is such a great name. She also enjoyed one-offs on shows like Thriller, One Step Beyond, and Alfred Hitchcock Presents. Oh, and she dated James Dean for a few years.
You're tearing me apart! Oh!
Go ahead. But remember this, Larson. People cheat on me just once.
Neston Booth, here playing Big Phil Nolan, also visited the Twilight Zone twice. He was the prison guard in Season 1's Escape Clause.
Hey, Bill, call the doc. Bedecker just dropped dead.
Poor devil.
He was pretty prolific in both the Western and detective TV genres, but sci-fi fantasy horror fans can find him in shows like Alfred Hitchcock Presents and Thriller.
Oh, I'm afraid I can't change a bill this size, sir.
Sheila the Cigarette Girl was played by actress/pinup model Jane Burgess, whose acting career lasted a mere 7 years, 1955 to 1962. This is her only genre outing among her 17 acting credits, and... yeah.
That chick that won't quit. It's like stacked, like beautiful.
You got me straight tripping, boo.
She's unmistakably and undeniably a TZ babe. With respect, of course. So, which episode comes out on top? Let's flip for it. Heads, it's the Fever. Tails, the Prime Mover. Huh. It came up heads. But then, I nod my head, wince a little, give it a little mental push, and telekinetically flip that coin over, and bada bing! The Prime Mover takes it. The Fever is technically well done, and it's certainly the more visually interesting of the two, except for Sheila the Cigarette Girl. And it's certainly a darker, more dramatic story, which I would typically gravitate toward, but ultimately it's yet another shitty person gets what's coming to him affair, which the Twilight Zone does very regularly. But in the Prime Mover, we get a charming tale with likable characters, one of whom uses his supernatural ability to put his best friend back on the straight and narrow. We don't see a lot of that. Dane Clark and Buddy Ebsen feel like real guys, and the love between them feels genuine. Sure, it's a lightweight story, and the stakes never really feel that high, despite those big boxes of money on display.
Bring plenty of lettuce, and I mean this kind of lettuce.
But that's not necessarily a bad thing. Sometimes a pleasant little palate cleanser really hits the spot. And hey, they don't all have to be masterpieces. This is a kind of similar deal as last time. Both episodes are fine, neither are favorites, but neither commit any egregious crimes against celluloid either.
Mr. Goldsmith, if you please.
One more thing. I don't plug other podcasts nearly enough, but since we've been talking about the Jerry Goldsmith jazz themes this week, look, if the musical aspect of the Twilight Zone interests you at all, I highly encourage you to head on over to the Goldsmith Odyssey, where they're covering the entirety of Jerry Goldsmith's film and TV scores chronologically. This plug would have made a lot more sense back when I did my Jerry Goldsmith jazz episode a couple years back. But in all fairness to me, their podcast didn't exist then. Anyway, they do it all. The Twilight Zone scores, the CBS Music Library stuff, it's all there. And they actually play the cues they're talking about. And the three hosts, Clark, David, and Yavar, are all a delight to listen to. They put an amateur like me to absolute shame. Do check them out. I'll put a link in the show notes. You got something you want to say to me, baby? Well, hit us up on Facebook and or Twitter. Just search for @ZonePod or Between Light and Shadow, a Twilight Zone podcast, and there we'll be. If you want to keep it on the down low, a private email works. zonepod@gmail.com. If you're on iTunes, a 5-star rating and a glowingly positive review would really hit the spot. I mean, it raises the visibility of the podcast. And hey, I'm not gonna lie, it makes me feel all warm and furry inside. Furry? Fuzzy, maybe. I don't know. Now, gang, Halloween's coming up, and this year, we're serving up the scariest thing the Twilight Zone ever threw at us in all its 5 years on the air.
But have you ever driven a 1924 Rickenbacker?
My dear Beavis, I've driven a chariot with 11 horses. I'm the guy responsible for Ben-Hur winning.
There's nothing more terrifying than a crappy comedy episode. We had to hit this one sooner or later, since it's a season 1 episode. It's time to just rip that Band-Aid off once and for all. So come back for that in not 2 weeks, but 1. Well, wait, right before Halloween, which might be more like 8 or 9 days. Still less than 2 weeks, though. That'll make 3 October episodes. But don't get greedy. This ain't 2017. I can't crank them out like I used to. Now, kids, if you happen to run into a one-armed bandit, don't hesitate to drop a few coins into it just for the hell of it. But if it starts talking to you and calling your name, run like hell and buy some scratch-offs instead. Your odds of winning are probably lower, but at least you won't end up with a broken neck in a hotel parking lot. I mean, probably. But whichever you choose, well, as always, play nice.
Between light and shadow.
Rent a car, yeah. And the opening act in Vegas is always like a pop singer, you know? And they bring him out, and he's really good, but he moves so fast, he's got to, because he's got like 15 minutes, he's got to get it all in. They introduce him, you know, ladies and gentlemen, it's Sands Hotel, let's proud to introduce Mr. Johnny Duke, let's bring him out. Hey, thank you for let's break in here. How many people to say? Okay, beautiful. Hey, Mr. Tucson, in Wisconsin. Hey, thank you for coming. I'd like to introduce the band. Bill, Tom, Jack, hey, Bill, Colonel Adelaide. We got nothing to hepatitis. Okay, thank you. It's good time in Las Vegas. I'd like to do a couple of gambling jokes for you. Because I gotta be me. I gotta be me. Okay, it's Sammy Davis Jr., personal friend of mine. Okay, now I'd like to do a little dancing for you. Here we go. It's impossible to put a Cadillac in your nose. It's just impossible. Okay, now do a couple of gambling jokes for you. Okay, the hills rely with the sound of money. Thank you.
Hanukkah in Las Vegas. It's a festival of neon lights. Bet $1 and eat some challah. The strip is kosher tonight. There's a menorah on the Tropicana and a stripper wearing just a yarmulke. Hanukkah in Las Vegas, 8 swinging nights. The Baruch Atah Adonai blessing is sung by a showgirl choir. When it's time to light the candles each night, Penn and Teller set them on fire. All the yentas make stops at the Forum shops, and the Timus is made with carrot tops. Hanukkah in Las Vegas, try the lamb chops. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, Moses went to the Luxor to shoot craps with Pharaoh. As he rolled the dice, he said real nice, let my people yo. The cantors are playing poker. They use chocolate coins for chips. All the rabbis bet on dreidel roulette, and the casino moil takes tips. Hanukkah in Las Vegas, it's a real gelt trip. Well, the shamash here is the stratosphere, and David Copperfield makes the latkes disappear. Hanukkah in Las Vegas, Mazel Tov, Sammy's watching from above. I said Hanukkah in Las Vegas, what's not to love?
Oh, I know it sounds stupid,